The galaxy had known nothing but war for as long as the stars had burned in the sky. Empires rose, only to fall in the wake of endless bloodshed, while entire civilizations were lost in the chaos. But now something different was emerging from the ashes, an empire born not of ancient kings, but of warriors. The Crimson Dominion was not a result of political ambition or diplomatic maneuvering, but of the will of genetically engineered humans known as the Warborn Monarchs. These warriors, born of battle and science, had only one purpose: to dominate. Empress Anaya, the youngest of the monarchs, stood at the forefront of this new order. Her ascent was as brutal as it was inevitable, an unstoppable force of nature whose sheer determination had turned the tide in the Dominion's favor. She had been forged for greatness, her body enhanced with superior strength, agility, and resilience, while her mind was a weapon sharper than any blade. Yet it was not just her physical prowess that made her feared across the galaxy. It was her cunning, her ability to calculate the most brutal strategies and see the patterns in the chaos of war. On the battlefield, Anaya was a legend. But even legends are tested, and as the Crimson Dominion expanded its borders, the challenges only grew. There were those who resisted the Dominion's rule, not just the shattered remnants of fallen empires, but whole factions of the galaxy's inhabitants who refused to kneel. On the world of Vulture Prime, one of the Dominion's most strategic colonies, the Resistance had dug in deep, refusing to surrender even as the Warborn Monarchs descended upon them with fire and blood. Anaya's fleet, the Red Reaper, was the spearhead of the assault. The ship, a massive war machine capable of turning entire worlds to ash, was her symbol. It was said that no fleet could stand against it, no wall could withstand its firepower, and no enemy could escape its reach. But this was not simply a war of weapons. It was a war of ideologies, a battle for control of a galaxy teetering on the edge of annihilation. As the Red Reaper dropped out of hyperspace above Vulture Prime, Anaya's eyes narrowed. The planet was a fortress, its surface riddled with defense turrets, automated drones, and military strongholds. The resistance here was not like the others she had crushed. This was no ragtag band of rebels. These were seasoned fighters, each one a testament to the endless war the galaxy had suffered through. They had been trained for this moment, and they would die for their freedom. "Prepare the first wave," Anaya commanded, her voice cold as steel. Her officers, a group of elite Warborn soldiers, immediately went to work, calculating the most efficient assault strategy. Anaya didn't need to give orders twice. Her fleet moved as one, a well-oiled machine that would crush anything in its path. The first wave of troops descended upon the planet's surface, their dropships carving through the skies, cutting through anti-air defenses with surgical precision. Ground forces followed, led by Anaya's personal guard, a squad of genetically enhanced soldiers whose loyalty to her was unshakable. They were the tip of the spear, and the first to engage the enemy on the blood-soaked streets of Vulture Prime's capital city. On the ground, the battle was chaotic, brutal. Explosions rocked the streets as the Dominion's forces pushed forward, their weapons cutting through resistance fighters with lethal efficiency. Anaya herself led the charge, her eyes locked on the enemy command center in the distance. As she cut down one opponent after another, her mind raced, calculating the moves of the enemy before they even made them. She was a living weapon, and her soldiers followed her every command without hesitation. But in the midst of the chaos, something began to stir, a shadow in the distance, moving with unnatural speed. Anaya's enhanced senses caught the movement just in time. From the corner of her eye, she saw it. A figure, cloaked in black, moving faster than any human could. It was a warrior, a trained killer, and it was coming for her. The figure stepped from the shadows, and Anaya's heart skipped a beat. This was no ordinary soldier. It was one of the Zirians, an alien species of ancient and terrible power. The Zirians had once been the galaxy's rulers. And now, it seemed, they were back, watching, waiting, and ready to strike. Anaya's gaze sharpened. This wasn't just another battle, it was a warning. The Zirians had arrived, and they were not the only threat lurking in the darkness. Anaya's heart raced, her instincts kicking in as the Zirian warrior moved closer. The air around them seemed to crackle with tension, and in that moment, the battlefield around her blurred into the background. She could feel the intensity of the enemy's presence, like a storm ready to break. With a flash of motion, the Zirian's blade, a weapon forged from an alien alloy, shimmered in the light of the distant sun. Without a word, Anaya's hand snapped to the hilt of her own weapon, a sword forged from the rarest of metals, an artifact of the Dominion's blood-stained past. The warrior lunged, but Anaya was faster. She sidestepped with inhuman grace, drawing her blade in a seamless arc that deflected the alien's strike. Sparks flew as their weapons clashed, the sound like the ringing of a bell. Her enhanced senses could track every move, every tiny change in the Zirian's posture. But this enemy was different, faster, more unpredictable than anything she had faced before. With a twist of the wrist, the Zirian disengaged, taking a step back to reassess her. Anaya's eyes narrowed. She had fought countless opponents, but this was no mere soldier. It was an emissary, a harbinger of something much more dangerous. Do you think you can stop the tide of history, human? The Zirian's voice was like gravel scraping against metal, deep and resonant. I am the tide, Anaya replied coldly, her voice barely above a whisper. She surged forward, her sword slashing through the air in a deadly arc, forcing the Zirian to retreat. The battle around her raged on, but her focus was now entirely on this single enemy. Her soldiers fought with ruthless efficiency, but Anaya's attention was fixated on the alien warrior. The Zirian was fast, but Anaya's Warborn enhancements made her faster. Her blade lashed out again and again, each strike calculated, each movement designed to drive her opponent back. Finally, with a swift kick, she knocked the Zirian off balance, sending the alien sprawling to the ground. Anaya stood over her fallen foe, her chest heaving with exertion. She knew this was only the beginning. If the Zirians were here, then the stakes had just changed. The Zirian snarled, her eyes glowing with a faint, otherworldly light. You have no idea what you're up against. This galaxy is ours. And you are just a blip in its history. Anaya's expression was cold, unyielding. Not anymore. She raised her sword, but before she could strike the killing blow, a loud roar echoed from behind her. The ground trembled as the resistance forces regrouped, a massive armored warship descending from the clouds, its cannons charging up for another barrage. Anaya's instincts kicked in once more, and she turned just in time to see a stream of energy fire from the ship's turrets, aimed directly at her forces. With lightning speed, she ordered her commanders to deploy their shields, but it was too late. The blast hit, and the shockwave sent her soldiers flying in all directions. The Zirian warrior used the opportunity to retreat, vanishing into the chaos of the battlefield. Anaya's eyes blazed with fury, but she knew she had to remain focused. The battle was far from over. As the Red Reaper continued its bombardment from orbit, Anaya's fleet descended from the sky, taking control of key points on the planet. However, something was off. There was a shift in the air, a sense that something was lurking beneath the surface. The Zirian's words echoed in her mind. This galaxy is ours. The idea was impossible. Humanity had fought for centuries to free itself from the shackles of alien dominance. But now, the Zirians were back, and they weren't just watching from the sidelines. They were in the thick of it. Anaya turned to her closest advisor, General Kalen, his face grim. We've underestimated them. Kalen's eyes narrowed. No, Empress. They've underestimated us. But Anaya knew better. The Zirians were old, their power ancient, and while humanity had always been resilient, she could feel the weight of the coming storm. The war that had been fought to unify humanity would pale in comparison to what was about to unfold. As the dust began to settle over the battlefield, the resistance forces were still regrouping, but Anaya knew that Volta Prime would fall, just like every other planet before it. Humanity had taken its first step toward victory, but the cost of that victory was only beginning to reveal itself. The Xyrians were no longer myths, they were enemies, and they would fight to the bitter end. And so would she. The Crimson Dominion was born in blood, and it would rise to rule the stars, but at what cost? The aftermath of the battle on Voltor Prime was nothing short of catastrophic. The smoke from the city's ruins hung heavy in the air, and the cries of the wounded echoed through the shattered streets. Yet, amidst the devastation, Empress Anaya stood tall, her resolve unwavering. Her forces had secured victory, barely, but the Xyrians' sudden appearance had altered the course of the war in ways no one could have anticipated. The true nature of the enemy was now a mystery, and Anaya couldn't afford to underestimate them again. As the Dominion's forces worked to salvage what they could from the wreckage, Anaya convened a war council aboard the Red Reaper. Her closest generals, all elite Warborn Monarchs, gathered around the holographic table. Despite their enhanced abilities, even they could sense the undercurrent of unease that had settled over the room. "Report," Anaya commanded, her voice cold and unyielding. "What do we know about the Xyrians?" General Kalen, the most trusted of her commanders, spoke first, his expression grim. "Little, Your Majesty. They're an ancient species, but most of the records we have are either incomplete or unreliable. They've been dormant for millennia, leaving behind ruins and cryptic messages. According to our intelligence, they disappeared before we could even reach the stars beyond the rim." His voice grew darker. "It's possible they've been waiting for the right moment to return." Anaya's eyes narrowed. "And they've chosen now." "It's hard to say," Callan replied, his tone uncertain. "The resistance on Voltor Prime had been growing in strength for months, but we didn't see any signs of Xyrian involvement. Their forces were too well coordinated, too efficient. It's almost as if they knew exactly when and where to strike." Anaya's mind raced. The Xyrians hadn't simply been watching. They had been planning, biding their time. Their sudden appearance could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. The galaxy was at war, and the Xyrians had re-entered the fray for a reason. But what? "I'll need answers," she said sharply. "Send a reconnaissance team to scour the planet's surface for any traces of their technology or intelligence. If they're planning something bigger, we'll find it." Kalen nodded, but Anaya could see the concern in his eyes. It was clear that even he was beginning to question the Dominion's ability to face the Xyrians head-on. For the first time in years, Anaya felt a flicker of doubt. The Xyrians were a force unlike any she had ever faced. The days that followed were filled with intense searches and covert operations, but the Xyrians remained elusive. Every time, Anaya thought she was getting close. Every piece of the puzzle seemed to slip through her fingers. And then, on the 6th day after the battle, a message arrived. A cryptic transmission from an unknown source. It was brief, yet carried with it a chilling warning. "The Dominion will fall. You are playing a game you cannot win. The Seraph is coming." The Seraph. The name was foreign, but it carried an undeniable weight. Anaya's instincts screamed that this was no ordinary enemy. The message contained nothing else. No coordinates, no instructions, just those words. But even that was enough to send a shiver down Anaya's spine. "The Seraph," she muttered to herself, repeating the word over and over. There was something about it that sounded ancient, like a legend she had once heard, a story whispered in the darker corners of the Dominion's earliest conquests. It had always been just that, stories. But now it was clear that the legends were true. Kalen, standing nearby, met her gaze. "You think this is the leader of the Xyrians?" Anaya's expression hardened. "I don't know, but I intend to find out." With the message hanging heavily in the air, Anaya turned her focus to the looming threat. The Seraph was no mere warrior, and if the Xyrians had resurrected such a being from their ancient past, it was only a matter of time before they would strike in full force. Her mind swirled with possibilities, her every thought bent on the coming battle. But even as she prepared for war, Anaya couldn't shake the feeling that something else was in motion, something darker. The Xyrians were not merely preparing for a war of conquest. They were planning something far more sinister. And at the heart of it, somewhere deep in the shadows of their ancient empire, was the Seraph. The war for the galaxy had taken a terrifying turn, and Anaya realized that the future of the Crimson Dominion would be shaped not by human might alone, but by the enigmatic power of an enemy whose origins lay far beyond the stars. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the very soul of the galaxy, and the enemy's veil was just beginning to lift. Anaya turned to her war council. "Prepare the fleet. We're going hunting." It was time to confront the Seraph, and everything she had built was riding on this decision. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The fleet assembled above the blackened skies of Vulture Prime was a testament to the power of the Crimson Dominion. The Red Reaper loomed larger than ever, its massive silhouette cutting through the cold expanse of space as it prepared for the next phase of the war. Around it, the rest of the Dominion's forces gathered in a perfect formation, more than enough to conquer any resistance. But as Empress Anaya gazed out from the command deck, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that their enemies were playing a game with rules they didn't fully understand. The Xyrians were more than just a threat. They were an enigma wrapped in layers of secrecy, and somewhere in that darkness, the Seraph waited. "Ready the fleet for immediate departure," Anaya commanded, her voice calm but laced with urgency. Her gaze remained fixed on the holographic display of Vulture Prime below. "We found the coordinates. The Seraph is hiding somewhere in the depths of the Kyrian Nebula. Prepare for hyperspace." General Kalen, his face weary but resolute, stood by her side, studying the readings. "The nebula is a death trap, Your Majesty. Navigating through it will be nearly impossible. The stellar storms will scramble our sensors, and the gravitational anomalies could tear ships apart." Anaya's lips curled into a cold smile. "If we are to find the Seraph, we will have to walk through the storm." The command was given. The fleet jumped into hyperspace, the stars stretching into lines of light as they sped toward the nebula. The journey was perilous. Even with the technological advancements of the Dominion, the Kyrian Nebula was known for its unpredictable storms, massive waves of cosmic energy that could tear apart ships in an instant. But Anaya was willing to risk it all. The Seraph was a threat she could not allow to remain hidden. Hours passed in the tense silence of space, the Red Reaper and its fleet cutting through the nebula's chaotic currents. The sensors were almost useless here, the static crackling and warping their readings. The crew worked tirelessly, trying to navigate their way through the swirling chaos that surrounded them. Anaya stood at the command table, her hand resting lightly on the edge, her mind sharp and focused. Every instinct told her that they were closing in on something monumental. But the deeper they ventured into the nebula, the more she felt like they were being drawn into a trap. "Report," she demanded, her eyes scanning the readings. "Shifting gravimetric fields, Your Majesty. We're approaching the center of the nebula," said Lieutenant Tessa, her voice strained. "But something's wrong. We're detecting a faint energy signature, one that doesn't match anything in our databases." Anaya's pulse quickened. This was it. They had found something. Or rather, something had found them. Without warning, a massive shockwave ripped through the fleet, sending the ships tumbling as the Red Reaper lurched violently. Anaya was thrown off her feet, but caught herself on the wall, her heart racing. Alarms blared, and the ship's crew scrambled to regain control. "Status," Anaya barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We're hit, Empress." A massive pulse. Energy readings off the charts. Kalen's voice was tense, his eyes scanning the readings. "It's coming from a ship, a massive one." From the depths of the nebula, a colossal shadow emerged, a craft so large it seemed to fill the void itself. Its dark, angular shape gleamed with an eerie glow, an alien design far beyond anything the Dominion had ever encountered. The energy pulses that had torn through their fleet were now radiating from the ship. "It's the Seraph's ship," Kalen muttered, dread in his voice. Anaya's eyes locked on the massive vessel. There was no mistaking it. This was no mere warship. It was ancient, older than the Xyrians, older than anything humanity had encountered. And it was not just a weapon. It was a symbol, a reminder that they were not dealing with a simple foe, but something that had existed long before the rise of the Dominion. "They'd been waiting for us," Anaya said, her voice icy with realization. "Prepare for battle. We're not leaving this nebula without answers." As her fleet adjusted its position, the massive alien ship unleashed another pulse. But this time, the Dominion's fleet was ready. The battle began in an instant, the darkness of space filled with the sounds of weapons fire and the flash of energy blasts. Anaya stood at the heart of the chaos, a vision of calm. Her mind raced as she processed the situation. The Seraph's ship was not only powerful but seemed to be controlling the very fabric of the nebula around them. Gravitational fields shifting, cosmic storms intensifying. This was no ordinary battle. This was a war against the very forces of nature. The Red Reaper shook as more energy pulses struck it, but Anaya's resolve remained unshaken. She could feel it. She was getting closer to the truth. The Seraph was not just an enemy to be defeated. The Seraph was the key to the past, the one who could unravel the mysteries of the Xyrians and their true purpose. And Anaya would stop at nothing to claim that knowledge, no matter the cost. The fate of the galaxy rested on it. The battle in the Kyrian Nebula raged with a ferocity that could only be matched by the storms that twisted through the chaotic space. Anaya stood firm at the helm of the Red Reaper, her gaze fixed on the enormous Xyrian vessel, which seemed to be more than just a ship. It was a fortress, a monolith of dark metal and ancient power. Each pulse of energy it sent out rattled her fleet, sending shockwaves that scrambled the sensors and threw their formations into disarray. But Anaya wasn't one to back down. She had fought for this empire, and she would fight for it until her last breath. The Seraph, though unseen, was the true target of her wrath, and the alien ship was the key to reaching it. She needed to get closer. "Full speed ahead, Kalen," she commanded, her voice unwavering. "Cut through their fire. We can't let them control the battlefield." General Kalen, standing beside her, didn't hesitate. "Aye, Empress," preparing evasive maneuvers. The Red Reaper surged forward, dodging the deadly pulses of energy sent from the massive Xyrian vessel. It wasn't just about firepower. This ship was a living extension of the Seraph's will, and every shot seemed designed to break their resolve, to test how much the Dominion would endure. The rest of the fleet followed suit, pushing forward through the pulse of alien weaponry, their ships twisting and darting in a deadly dance. Anaya's mind raced as the battle continued. She had faced impossible odds before, but something about this conflict felt different, like it was more than just a fight for survival. The Xyrians were playing a long game, and the Seraph was at the center of it all. The question remained, why now? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden transmission that cut through the static of the battle, a voice distorted and ancient, resonating with an almost otherworldly power. "Empress Anaya, your people are nothing more than fleeting sparks in the dark. The Seraph's return is inevitable. Your victory is a dream, a momentary blip in the tapestry of time. You cannot stop what has already been set into motion." Anaya's jaw tightened. The voice was cold, unfeeling, and it sent a chill through her that no weapon ever could. She recognized the voice instantly. It was the voice of a Xyrian, an ancient leader, one of the Seraph's own. "I don't believe in fate," Anaya replied, her voice steady. "I believe in what I can destroy." The transmission cut off abruptly, but the damage had been done. The message lingered in her mind, gnawing at her, but she refused to let it show. She would not be shaken. Not now. Not when they were so close. With a snap of her fingers, she ordered her forces to launch their boarding craft. The battle would not be won from a distance. They needed to board the Xyrian ship and end this. If the Seraph was truly aboard, it was time to confront them, face to face. The Red Reaper and its allies launched a coordinated strike, their boarding vessels piercing the heart of the Zirian ship. As the Dominion soldiers stormed the dark halls of the enemy vessel, Anaya felt an electric pulse run through her, something ancient and powerful emanating from within the walls of the ship. It was as if the very air around her was alive with a malevolent energy. The interior of the ship was like nothing she had ever seen. It wasn't made of metal alone. Strange, organic materials wove through the structure, pulsating with a strange energy that made the walls feel alive. The alien architecture was far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered, a testament to the unimaginable age of the Zirians. "Stay sharp," Anaya ordered as she led her elite squad through the dark corridors. "We don't know what we're walking into." Her squad moved forward, weapons drawn, every step cautious, each corner watched. The deeper they went, the more the ship seemed to resist them. They encountered strange, nightmarish creatures, biomechanical beasts, half machine, half organic, designed for one purpose: to kill. They fought through the ship's defenses with brutal efficiency, but the further they pressed in, the more oppressive the ship became. The walls seemed to close in around them, the darkness growing thicker. Then, finally, they'd reached the heart of the vessel, an enormous chamber bathed in the sickly glow of alien light. And there, standing at the center of the room, was the Seraph. It was not a creature of flesh and bone. It was something more, something ancient, a being wrapped in dark, flowing robes of energy, its form constantly shifting, as if it were both there and not there at the same time. The Seraph's face was hidden, but its presence was undeniable. It exuded an aura of power, of knowledge older than the stars themselves. Anaya's breath caught in her throat. This was the being that had orchestrated everything, the true face of the Zirian threat, and she was standing before it. The Seraph's voice echoed through the chamber, filling the air like a thunderclap. "You have come far, Empress, but it is too late. The cycle is complete. You cannot defeat what you cannot comprehend." Anaya's grip tightened on her weapon. "Then let me show you what humanity is capable of." The Seraph's presence was overwhelming, like the weight of 1,000 years pressing down on Anaya's chest. The air in the chamber seemed to thrum with energy, an ancient force that bent the very fabric of reality around them. The Seraph itself was a shifting entity, a being that seemed to transcend the limitations of time and space, its shape flickering between forms. But beneath its otherworldly visage, one thing was clear. It was ancient, impossibly ancient, and its power radiated from every fiber of its existence. Anaya stood motionless, every nerve in her body on edge as her soldiers fanned out around her. Her eyes locked on the Seraph, her mind calculating every possible move. She could feel the ship beneath them, the hum of its dark, alien systems. It was alive in a way that defied understanding. The Seraph's voice, deep and echoing, shattered the silence. "You think you can stop the inevitable? You, who have barely touched the surface of the galaxy, who have only just begun to grasp the infinite truths of the universe." Anaya didn't flinch. "I've seen the truth, Seraph. I've seen what your kind is capable of. And I'd learned that humanity has more power in its veins than you can possibly imagine." A low, eerie laugh rumbled through the chamber, the Seraph's form rippling with amusement. "Your arrogance is as fleeting as the stars, Empress. You know nothing of the forces at play here. The Dominion, the Zirians, all of this is but a speck in the grand design. You cannot win. The galaxy does not belong to you. Then what does it belong to?" Anaya shot back, her voice rising with conviction. "You and your people have ruled for eons, waging war, enslaving worlds, but I've seen what lies beneath your mask. The galaxy doesn't belong to the Zirians. It belongs to the living, to those who fight for their future." The Seraph's form seemed to shimmer, and then, for a moment, its face became clear, a face that was not a face at all, but an intricate web of shifting energies and dark voids. Its eyes, ancient and endless, seemed to look through Anaya, seeing the very depths of her soul. "You misunderstand, Empress," the seraph said, its voice both cold and tragic. "I do not seek to rule. I seek to guide, to restore what was lost." "Restore?" Anaya echoed, confusion creeping into her tone. "Restore what?" "A dying empire, a galaxy ruled by ancient beings who care nothing for the lives of those they conquer." The seraph's form flickered again, and for an instant, Anaya saw something else in its eyes. Regret, sorrow. "No, Empress. What I seek to restore is balance. The Zirians were once the stewards of the galaxy. We kept the cycles in motion, ensuring that life flourished in harmony with the cosmos. But something happened, a fracture in the fabric of existence. The great cataclysm, the fall of the Zirians. These were the consequences of an ancient mistake, and now I must fix it." Anaya took a step forward, her voice unwavering. "You speak of balance, but all I see is destruction. You want to rewrite the galaxy in your image, but you can't control what you've unleashed. We, humans, are proof of that. We rise, even against the odds." The seraph's shifting form trembled as if struck by the force of her words. For a long moment it was silent, and then it spoke again, its tone soft, almost mournful. "You are right, Empress. The cycle has already begun. The seeds of destruction are sown, and no matter how hard you fight, the entropy will come. It always does." Anaya's grip on her weapon tightened. "Then we fight until it's over." She motioned to her commanders, and the battle erupted once more. The air was filled with the roar of gunfire and the crackle of energy shields. The soldiers of the Dominion, fierce and unyielding, pushed forward, but the seraph's ship seemed to respond to every movement, shifting and adapting as if it were an extension of the ancient being itself. The walls of the chamber pulsed with a dark energy, and the ship began to shift, its form stretching and bending as if it was folding the very fabric of space around them. Anaya leaped into the fray, her sword cutting through the air with a precision born of years of training. But as her blade struck, it met something far more powerful than she anticipated, a dark force that pushed her back, sending her crashing into the ground. The seraph's voice filled the air once more, no longer just a whisper, but a powerful roar. "You cannot win, but you may still learn." Anaya struggled to her feet, a fire burning in her chest. She knew the odds were against them, but she would not back down. This battle wasn't just for survival, it was for the future of the galaxy, and she would fight to the last breath. "Then teach me," she snarled, "and I'll show you what humanity is truly capable of." The seraph's laughter rang out again, louder this time, sounding almost like a dirge. It had underestimated humanity before, and now it would learn that its arrogance would be its downfall. The battle surged around Empress Anaya like a living thing, a torrent of destruction that tore through the heart of the seraph's ship. Energy beams arced through the chamber, flashing like lightning, while the Dominion forces pressed forward against the overwhelming power of the seraph's ancient ship. The walls seemed to close in around them, alive with dark, pulsing energy. The very air vibrated with a strange, unearthly hum that made it feel as if the universe itself were watching them, waiting. Anaya's body was bruised, her uniform torn from the ferocity of the fight, but her spirit remained unbroken. The seraph's overwhelming presence was like an unyielding force pushing against her very will, but Anaya refused to falter. Humanity had fought countless wars, survived impossible odds, and stood tall in the face of annihilation. They would not be crushed by the weight of ancient arrogance. Not now. She moved through the chaos like a blade through silk, her soldiers following her lead. The enemy's biomechanical creatures surged toward them, but Anaya struck with deadly precision, cutting through the alien monsters that stood in her way. Each swing of her sword was a testament to the resilience of humanity, the legacy of her people, the Warborn Monarchs. They were not just soldiers, they were the living embodiment of defiance. But as she pushed deeper into the heart of the seraph's ship, she felt the presence of the entity itself growing stronger. The The walls seemed to pulse with dark energy, and the air was thick with an unnatural pressure. Every step forward felt like wading through water. It was as if the very ship was fighting to keep them out, and the Seraph was at the core of it all, manipulating the flow of energy itself. "Stay focused," Anaya shouted to her forces as they advanced. "We're almost there." Finally, they reached the central chamber of the ship, the heart of the Seraph's vessel. The room was vast, stretching out into infinity, with no visible walls, just swirling energy that seemed to bend space itself. And there, floating at the center of it all, was the Seraph. Its form had shifted again, but now it was no longer just a presence. It had taken shape, an enormous, ghostly figure, a being made of living shadow and light. Its eyes were two burning orbs of pure, unfathomable knowledge, and as it spoke, the ground beneath their feet trembled. "You do not understand what you face," the Seraph's voice boomed, filling the chamber like a great storm. "You are insects in the vastness of existence, and you are about to break the balance you cannot comprehend." Anaya's voice was steady, unwavering. "I understand more than you think. You've held the galaxy in your grasp for far too long, Seraph. But it's over now. Your time is done." The Seraph's gaze flickered to her, and for a moment, Anaya could feel the weight of its ancient sorrow. It was as though the Seraph could see into her very soul, understanding the fire that burned within her. "I do not seek power, Empress," it said softly, a trace of sadness in its voice. "I seek to save what is left. The galaxy is dying, and what I offer is not conquest, but restoration." Anaya stepped forward, her voice firm. "The galaxy doesn't need restoration. It needs freedom. And we will not bow to an ancient ruler who thinks it can dictate our future." The Seraph's form began to shift, dark tendrils of energy spiraling out from its body. "You do not know the cost of your defiance. The cycle must be preserved." Suddenly, the energy in the room intensified, and Anaya felt it. The Seraph was channeling the very power of the ship, drawing from the deepest depths of the nebula itself. The gravity in the room shifted, and the air grew thick and oppressive. The ship itself seemed to scream in protest, and the energy surges began to warp reality, distorting everything around them. "Fall back," Anaya shouted to her soldiers as the chaos intensified. The power of the Seraph was unlike anything they had ever faced, and they could feel it, a crushing force that sought to overwhelm them, to break their wills. But Anaya stood her ground, her hand outstretched toward the Seraph. "I am Empress of the Crimson Dominion, and I will not let you rewrite the galaxy. Your cycle ends here." The Seraph's eyes glowed brighter, a flare of brilliant, blinding light that threatened to burn them all. The room shook violently, and Anaya's soldiers were thrown to the ground by the sheer force of the energy. And then, in the heart of the storm, Anaya felt something shift, a spark, a flicker of insight that cut through the darkness. It was as if the Seraph's power had exposed a weakness, a crack in its defenses. Without thinking, Anaya moved. She charged toward the Seraph, her blade raised high, her body propelled by a force of will stronger than the very energy threatening to crush her. With a roar, she plunged her sword into the heart of the Seraph's ethereal form. Time seemed to freeze. The entire chamber shuddered violently, as if the ship itself were recoiling from the blow. The Seraph let out an unearthly scream, a sound that echoed through the very fabric of space. Anaya stood firm, her breath ragged, her grip on the sword unyielding. "This is humanity's future." The Seraph's form flickered once more, its eyes flashing with a final burst of understanding. And then, with one final surge of energy, it collapsed into a wave of light and darkness, its ancient power unraveling before Anaya's defiant gaze. The chamber fell silent. The Seraph was gone. Anaya took a slow, steady breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The battle was over. The war for the galaxy was far from won, but humanity had struck a decisive blow. The Seraph's cycle was no more. The Dominion would rise, and the galaxy would belong to the living once more. The silence that followed the Seraph's fall was deafening, as if the very universe had exhaled a breath it had been holding for millennia. The shimmering energy that had once surrounded the Seraph dissipated into the air, leaving nothing but the faint hum of the damaged ship. Anaya stood in the center of the shattered chamber, her sword still glowing from the final strike. Her heart raced in her chest, and the weight of the moment settled over her like a heavy cloak. The Seraph was gone. The endless cycle of ancient control had been broken. The galaxy was free, freed from the oppression of a being who had sought to rewrite the future in its own image. But the war was not over. Not yet. Anaya turned, her eyes meeting the faces of her soldiers, their expressions a mixture of disbelief, exhaustion, and cautious hope. Kalen, her most trusted general, stepped forward, his expression grim but proud. "Empress," Kalen said, his voice low, "we've done it. But this ship, this war, it's not just over. There's more to be done." Anaya nodded, her gaze moving across the ruined interior of the Seraph's ship. The remnants of the Zirian fleet were scattered across the nebula, their forces shattered in the wake of their leader's destruction. But the true work of the Dominion, the real battle, was just beginning. The Seraph's death was not a signal of peace, but of a new beginning, one where the power structures of the galaxy would have to be rebuilt from the ashes. "We have defeated the Seraph," Anaya said, her voice strong, yet filled with a deep, sorrowful resolve. "But we now face the consequences of its actions. The Zirian Empire is crumbling, and the galaxy is on the verge of chaos. We need to be ready, not just for the battles ahead, but for the rebuilding of an entire civilization." Kalen nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "We'll need allies, new allies, Empress. The Dominion must be strong if we are to lead, if we are to fill the void left by the Seraph's reign." "Agreed," Anaya replied, her gaze hardening with determination. "We will not let the galaxy fall into chaos. The Dominion will become a force that others can rally behind. We will rebuild, and we will make sure that no one ever has the power to control us again." But even as she spoke these words, Anaya could not shake the feeling that the true challenges were still to come. The Seraph had been only one part of a much larger, more intricate web. The Zirian Empire had been just one thread. The galaxy was vast, and its mysteries stretched far beyond the reach of even the mightiest of empires. There were ancient forces at work, forces far beyond what humanity could even begin to understand. The Seraph had been but a piece of a puzzle that was only now beginning to take shape. Anaya knew that the coming years would be marked by difficult choices, the forging of alliances with races they once saw as enemies, and the constant need to ensure that their newfound power would not corrupt them. As the echoes of the battle faded and the damaged ship began to crumble around them, Anaya looked out toward the stars, her mind focused on the future. Humanity had proven its strength, its resilience, and its unwavering determination. They had fought, and they had won, but what came next would define them. It would define the new age they were about to enter. "We rise," Anaya whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the rumbling of the ship's collapse. "We rise, and we rebuild. For humanity, for the future." Kalen stepped beside her, his gaze following hers toward the stars. "And we will not let the darkness return." Anaya turned her back on the Seraph's fallen ship, her mind already working on what lay ahead. They would return to the Dominion, to their people. They would rebuild their fleets, heal their wounds, and strengthen their alliances. But most of all, they would honor the legacy of those who had fought and died in this war. The future of the galaxy was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity had a place in it. The Warborn Monarchs, forged in the fires of battle, had emerged victorious, and they would never allow anyone to take that victory from them. With one final, resolute glance at the battlefield, Anaya turned and strode forward, her generals and soldiers following in her wake. The galaxy was wide and full of untold possibilities, but no matter what came next, she knew one thing for certain: Humanity would not just survive the chaos. It would rise to shake the galaxy's future, and it would do so with the strength, courage, and tenacity that had defined them since the dawn of their existence. The war was over, but the true story of humanity had only just begun.